All right, another totally rewarding chats, and we have Teri Zipper today, and we're going to bounce right after HR tech. I don't know if you're jet lagged or not, but welcome.
I am. I'm still jet lagged. It takes about 3 days to recover, and I didn't get back till Friday night.
So I didn't know when Teri quickly asked if she was allowed to drink during this. We'll be on YouTube, but when she said that, I will say I had a moment of what were you drinking?
Yeah.
What was the depth of that question when you were asking?
My plug for Coke Zero.
Okay, well I didn't know if there was going to be like a bourbon to go with it.
You never know.
Yeah, I guess
We don't know what's
I am in
the
Kentucky,
can.
so
Right.
Yeah,
We
I
don't
know.
know what's in the can.
So give us your bio and kind of where you're at, and then of some kind. Well, we prefer it's your hobby, just not a hobby.
All right. I am the CEO and managing partner at Sapient Insights Group. You might know us from the research that we do around HR technology specifically. We also do a lot of work in change management. I spent about 20 years of my career at Mercer. Spent a little bit of time there with Sean. That's how we know each other. And most of my career has been spent around HR technology, a large part of it around comp technology specifically. So owned some product management for some old school tools that did compensation planning and compensation management back in the day. So that's where I've been. I'm still sitting in Louisville, Kentucky, for those of you who don't know me and don't know where I'm at, home of the Kentucky Derby. And the baseball bats from Hilrick and Bradsby, and bourbon, which we were just talking about. So lots of good things going on here. So you want a hobby. That hobby is not drinking bourbon. I'm not really a bourbon drinker. But I would say, and I've probably talked about my biking hobby a lot on here, so I'll skip that and mention that my husband is a studio musician, and so I'm his marketer. So my other hobby is marketing pop music for my husband.
Wow.
Which is kind of fun.
Got to get on the distribution list, actually.
I really do. I'm failing as a marketer.
I've been on that list. I get the notes.
Yeah.
So we have the speed round of questions. And ironically, for those that don't know, Teri is a return guest. So we can go back and check and see if some of these questions are the same, if she gave us the same answers. Are you a coffee or tea person?
I prefer tea, but about 3 years ago, I got on a coffee kick, and I was never a coffee drinker. I was in New Orleans for a project, and I had a cup of Orleans coffee. That was some good coffee.
Wow, they've converted you. That should be there. They should call you up and be like, we converted one.
Yeah, they did, actually. They really did.
Vacation place you'd like to go that you've never been to?
Ooh, my gosh. I don't really have a good answer for that. I've probably been everywhere I want to go. I did not go to Rome. I would love to go to Rome. I've been to Italy, but when I was there, I did not go to Rome and some of the locations on the water, on the coast that I would have loved to have seen. So I would like to go back and do that.
Okay. An important one that's become more important as we've gone through the year. You have a weekend away. Are you going to go at a posh weekend away or out roughing it in the woods?
Probably neither. I'm going to go spend the day on my bike.
Okay.
Probably riding 50 or so miles and then come home and sleep in my posh bed.
So so you say that it's
A little of both.
My daughter. Yeah, so a little of both. So my daughter is a 100% go play outside, my youngest, and absolutely wants to not spend the night outside after that. So she wants to go be out in nature and then have a posh night at the end. So this is becoming a thing now, I'm finding.
Yeah, they have glamping. They have something called glamping. Have you heard of this?
Well,
Which is basically, it's pretty
accused
cool.
of that in the trailer quite frequently for not roughing it.
Yeah.
So really important question. Favorite person you've ever mentored?
I feel like there is a bias behind this question. Just a theory.
In fact, wait. Actually, we're going to skip that. So for those who don't know, so Terry was my mentor when I first got to Mercer and was super helpful. So she took basically, I came from development, and having a mentor to help in corporate Mercer was, at the time, I thought a dumb idea. And about 2 years in, I realized the genius behind it.
And you were a great mentee.
Oh, thank you. So I take direction well. So.
Yeah.
Or
That's why
or
he wore
was-
the collared shirt today,
Yeah.
Paul.
I think he's a very moldable product, right? Like it was one of those, like you had lots of canvas in which to be your mentor artist.
Plenty to
I
work
think we
with.
should get off this topic sooner rather than later is what I think should happen. And
You brought it
creamy
up,
and
man.
crunchy peanut butter.
Creamy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, see? All right. So last week, because this is, was last week, believe it or not, you were at HR Tech. I was there. They wouldn't let Paul in. So we can fill in, Paul, how it went. So I was jokingly going to say, you can't say AI for 5 minutes, but actually after having been there, it's free game on this session. Give us, wherever you want to start, your overall impression of what you saw at HR Tech this year, maybe compared to last year, the themes or what seems to be working for companies.
Yeah, it was definitely different than last year. Like last year, every booth had AI just plastered all over it, right? Like you saw AI everywhere. And it's not that you didn't see it this year, but to me, it was from a kind of a different perspective, and it wasn't sort of in your face, right? There were a lot of topics, there were a lot of sessions where people were talking about AI. I did the closing keynote for the Women in Tech, and that whole session was just talking about what the heck is it, right? And how are we executing on it? But when I talked to people in the booths, it wasn't the same as last year, which was, let us show you this new AI thing. It was a lot more, I felt more of a journey and much more agentic focused and sort of how we're actually putting these agents in the process. And so it was less about a specific task and more about the journey or the process. And, the AI component was just there. Like you didn't have to call it out.
Would you say, I guess the way I've kind of been trying to phrase it is it's kind of AI for purpose driven. It's purpose driven now. Last year, I would agree with you, other than the startup pavilion, which had a lot of AI. And if you did, we were kind of near them. And so, I wandered in because I can't help myself. And there were some that just were like, we have AI. And you're kind of like, what's it do? And it's like, well, it AIs thing. So I agree with you. I think the biggest difference was purpose driven because I didn't see, I'd be curious your take, I didn't see from an HR functionality standpoint problems being solved. I didn't see anything new-ish. Like there were periods where you saw ATS for retail or ATS for restaurant business or the payroll companies that were going to the individual a couple years ago. Like you didn't see new function. What you saw was everybody kind of using AI for their current function. And I don't know if that jives with the way you saw it.
Yeah, I was happy to see that. So I did a word cloud in my session to kick off the session. And I asked people how they were feeling about AI right now. Like what one word, right? And I was actually pleased to see that the biggest word on the chart, there were two words that were almost the same size, but the biggest one was excited, and the second biggest one was overwhelmed. So I was excited to see that move away from like, oh my God, like I don't know what to do, to all right, we're much more excited about it this year. We're seeing some things happening. So I think that the overwhelmed is getting smaller and the excited is getting bigger. I think if you'd have done that word cloud a few months ago, you might have seen a different result. But you know, as far as what,
Hey, we're the payroll baddies, and our mission is to make payroll fun and relatable.
And call out industry when we hear it.
You gotta call it out. You gotta call it like you see it. But we also gotta shine a light on all those unsung payroll heroes out there, making sure we get paid.
Yeah, those are the real payroll baddies out there, and we love sharing their stories and showing them love.
With gold chain and everything, baby.
By the way, SAP is the best payroll out there, and if you don't like it,
Get out.
I saw, and some of it, you know, is under NDA, right? But I did see some very interesting things. Now, what we saw, the top roles, when I look at some of the data that came back in the report, the top roles that are being impacted clearly are recruiting. Obviously, that's always been like one of the top use cases. The learning is another one, and communication for obvious reasons. But at the enterprise level, what we saw was much more, the big impact was HR operations, you know, HR support, that kind of thing. And what we were talking about in a lot of the sessions, because HR is obviously important, right? It's a critical function. And there's a lot that AI can do, but I think, you know, I had a couple of CHROs on the panel. The bigger results right now are happening in the functional areas where work is being delivered, right? So one of the people that was on my panel was Ectavias from Keck Medicine. And, you know, so in the medical field, there's a lot more work that's being done from an AI perspective, and that is having a much bigger impact on businesses and, you know, productivity and all of those things than just figuring out how to do something faster and better in HR, right?
Interesting. I mean, I think when I, you know, my tagline these days is AI, you're a toy or a tool, right? Is it going to actually do something for you, or is it just something you play with? And where AI is making a bigger impact, to your point, is when there's good structured data and clear things you can optimize for, right? Because AI is a predictive engine at the end of the day. And, you know, look at all of these blood samples and tell me which of them has this thing in it, right? Like, that's a pretty clear data structure and predictive outcome. You know, in HR, we don't always have nice, clean, predictive things to, you know, we have people, which are sort of difficult to, you know, productize, if you will.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised to hear that you see impact happening in, you know, specific areas where the sort of ecosystem, the infrastructure is ripe to make this data work. And there are some specific HR use cases where that may be true, but it's hard to do it for everything, right? And as a result, you get a little bit of this toy flavor. You know, maybe it just helps you a little bit on the margin. It takes good notes. You know,
Yeah.
Is that really what we're trying to solve for here with AI?
Yeah, some of the other data, 80% of people are using AI in some way every day, mostly personal AI. But when you think about, when we asked them what they were using from an embedded technology perspective, there was only about 28% said they were using embedded AI. Now, some of that I think might be, they don't necessarily know that it's already embedded in there, because God knows it's already there. You know, there's a lot of things that have been doing AI or some form of machine learning, right, for years. So, you know, some of it I think is definitionally, you know, what is it? Because people are always, yeah, hey, we talked about, are you going to do AI? Well, how do I do AI, right? Like, what does that even mean? And, you know, you have to really get down to the nuts and bolts, and data is critical from an HR perspective. We know our data sucks, right? And there was a really good piece of information that came out of the survey this year around manager self-service that surprised me. It surprised me because it's been this way for years, but there's still almost 50% of organizations that are not doing any sort of manager self-service. So right there, you can just think, okay, I see why the data can be, problematic, right? If HR is controlling that, and they're at the center, I can see where there would be still continue to be some challenges from a data perspective when the people who know this stuff and should be doing it are not able to do it or don't have the tools, or those tools have not been open to them.
It's interesting because I think a couple of things you said there, Terry. One, the AI is already in it. And I think companies are stuck in this interesting place where if you were to put something out there and say this tool does this, and you check the box and it just does it, and that, how cool is that? They almost have to say AI is behind it or large language models behind it. They're almost caught in this circle now of like not just saying what it does and do you really care how it happens? To your point, they might be using it. In manager self-service, I think there's a couple of things. I'd be curious, I don't know if the survey went that deep into it, but where is the restriction in getting it in the hands of managers when it has AI in it? And is that from HR? Is it from finance? Is it from IT that doesn't want, because we know sometimes you can't use all the toys at work and other places, and they want to quarantine off their data sets to other LLMs. So I'd be very curious on like your thoughts, if it's anecdotally or part of the report, like what is that 50% that managers can't get in their hand? What's the rationale behind it?
So it's I'm going to work with Raven Intel. We're going to do some stuff around this because she does a lot of work around implementation, but it is largely a control issue. And thinking that the managers don't have the skills to do it.
Interesting.
Okay. But are you hearing that IT's in the way or no? Because I feel like a year ago, probably a big change since then. IT, probably rightly so, and I'll say this rightly so, when it first came out, was like, we're not going to unleash this on everybody until we check with it. And to be fair, I think most IT teams have played with it because, let's be honest, they're in tech. They're like, we're definitely going to try this out. And I think that's become a less of a thing, more anecdotally in my mind, over the past little bit. They're now saying, we've got the controls in place. We know what we're doing now. We got to be let out.
Yeah. Let's circle back on that after, we do this work with Raven, but and if you're talking about the AI component, sure. I mean, IT has been in the way on that, but the interesting thing about just sort of the general ability to get manager self-service tools in the hands of people has not been an AI issue, right? And the numbers have been pretty flat. So I think the HR tech vendors have said, "Hey, we did it. We got it out there to you. We made it happen." If you're not using it, that we've already moved on to something else, right? We've moved on to the next big thing.
What was the either coolest or weirdest? Like what was the thing that stood out to you from the show floor or from the sessions?
I wish I could say I got around the whole show floor. I felt like I was concentrated in certain areas. Like the first night we did the banner delivery to all of the vendors who ended up in the top 5 in the research. And so I spent a good time at a number of booths. There were some cool things going on though. They were making cool things, lots of great tchotchkes. We were going to do a tchotchke award this year, but the person that was going to do that ended up having her baby, so she was not there. But we were gonna like
Good
judge
excuse.
all the tchotchkes and like
you definitely have to do it next year. There's not a lot of things, to be honest, Terry, that you could say that I should go be the judge of. I'm totally down. That's like finally one in my wheelhouse, like toys, right? Like, hey, go check out the cool toys.
I'm game too. As you know, Sean, I take swag very seriously for my team. And, we're custom building card games because we want to win the swag war. So I'm 100%.
Cool.
Like, good, memorable swag is
all right. I got judges next year for the swag show because there was some good stuff. Yeah,
there was, and there was some. What do they have? The gaming. They had. It's always interesting to me out of all that to watch how people try to differentiate to get you to stop by one way or the other.
Yeah, to get that badge scan, right?
Yeah, which
Like
I always find
I'm
interesting.
like
'Cause,
scooping up the tchotchke, and they're like, "Can I scan your badge?" I'm like, oh, "Okay, sure."
I know,
It's
and
part of
then
the deal.
yeah, and then I get then I get the salespeople calling this week. You're like, how bad? I guess that's what I guess I visited that booth for the wrong reason. So, did you go by the Una booth?
I think I did.
So Una is plug for Una coming, not in our exact space, so I don't feel bad. So Una is a wellness tool. Basically, they've taken all this data from the PhDs and the psychologists and whatever, and if you are using AI, so you can have your own one-on-one session with theoretically this fake person. And they had a booth there, a soundproof booth that you could go in with your own Una section. Yeah, I went in. It's slightly creepy, to be honest, how cool it is from the standpoint of like you literally are talking to a person about, I made up a problem. I have plenty of my own, but I'm a little concerned about being documented more than anything else. So I was like, I made up a problem and it was like rolling with it, like going to town, trying to solve my problem. It was actually really cool. And you can see like how fast it replies in a different voice and how it edited and changed because I was trying to make mistakes with, changing my story as I went. It is very good. Like it's pretty cool. Like stuff.
So what was it? What was it? Was it a mentor
It's
or
you're not
a
being
guy?
replaced, Terry. Don't worry. If that's where you're going. No, it's like if it's a wellness thing. So if I had a bad day at work and I'm like, you know what? I don't know if I can take working with Paul anymore on these podcasts. We did 2 in one day. I can't. What are some coping mechanisms? What should I take
Okay,
time? How much time should I take? Or
a little bit of coaching, a little bit of
yeah, a
yeah.
lot of everything. I mean, you could go all the way down the well. I jokingly, when I walked by again another time, they were like, "Oh, do you want to step in here?" And I'm like, "I don't think I can handle her again. She was too much. She knew too much."
Felt like that Minority Report movie when you walked into the mall and they scanned your eyes and then they knew all this stuff about you.
It was well, you talked to it. So, but what's interesting is I think it was the part that struck me from a comp tech standpoint, I'll make the leap back, was how conversational, it was being with me and then using professional terms to try to like the way that it was interacting and grabbing data and, because I was asking it data questions, being a nerd that I am, like, how many other people are like me? Well, according to this and this, and, I was like putting it in conversational tones back to me as opposed to spitting it out very, professionally. It understood my tone. And I was thinking like, how cool is that from a, manager self-service, Terry? Like you've got
Yeah.
people that are working on the shop floor and they want to ask like, how much should I pay Paul? And if we're like, well, in our industry, we should pay Paul 46.7% compa ratio compared to, like that answer would go nowhere. But if they actually spit it out and aggregate all the data, and it was very conversational. And so I'm like, now it's negative for Una. I wouldn't use Una because it freaks me out. But the technology behind it to be conversational for managers, I was like, they're way out there because obviously something psychological is who knows what you're grabbing, right? It's not even specific.
Yeah. So I'm doing a trial with a company called Baryons, and it's a coaching slash mentor type AI. And so I call it, in the morning and it asks me some questions and I tell it what I've got going on and it gives me some some guidance. It's same kind of thing. It's very conversational. It sounds just like you're talking to a regular person. It's really interesting, and so I'm anxious to see where that goes. I'm really just I'm just doing a pilot right now, and I haven't been as good of a pilotee as I probably should be. But it's very cool.
Comes back to your data point though. So I think, the question will be for me, like go one step out there. Will there be general LLMs or is everyone going to have industry specific or domain specific LLMs? And so that's where I personally think that's where it's going to go because of the data set behind it, right? And then they're all going to talk to each other, very much like Skynet, the very Terminator Skynet kind of moment where they are, the AIs are talking to each other because they're of their specific knowledge. But I think it all comes back to that data, like you were talking about, Terry. Like, do you have the right data for it to be conversational with? Otherwise, it's going to tell people the wrong answer conversationally.
Yeah, and it just doesn't sound right. Yeah, somebody asked me last week, like, do you know you're not supposed to say please and thank you to your chat GPT because it uses more energy? And I'm like, hey, when the AI rises up, I want them to know that I was very nice to them. I said please and thank you every time.
Yeah, save her. She was a nice one. She was nice to us. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. We I'm gonna a slight pivot, Terry. We were talking a little bit beforehand, right? HR tech is HR, right? It's the broad domain, and most of our sort of listeners, watchers are from the reward space. And historically, I would say HR tech has not been a reward centric experience. But what advice do you give to comp people, to rewards people, as they're thinking about monitoring these broad HR tech trends? Right? In your survey, you're not just asking questions of comp people. Comp people do respond, but I guess talk about your view of how rewards kind of fits within this broad HR tech space. What do rewards people need to be doing, engaging on the tech front from your point of view? Because you bring a broader perspective than I do, of course, where I'm very in the weeds on comp tech. You see the bigger picture of HR tech. So how would you advise rewards people on that?
That's a really good question, Paul. And after having spent a lot of my time in HR tech and in comp specifically in my early career, I've always felt like comp sort of sat outside the scope of everything else. I mean, for a long time, a lot of the HCM vendors did not have any capabilities there. I mean, back when I was selling comp technology, like that was not our competitor. Our number one competitor was Excel. To some extent, that's still a huge competitor. But a lot of the HCM vendors have now incorporated a lot more capability there. But I think the thing that's going to drive this together, and it's interesting to me how it's stayed somewhat disconnected for so long, is just how important the comp conversation is to everything else that we do from an HR perspective. And I remember being on the other side and sort of having to work with recruiting, and they were kind of doing their own thing and comp was doing their own thing, but then there was this middle ground where we need to get approval for these salaries and all this kind of stuff. And maybe AI will be the convergence of it. Maybe just in general, we're moving away from HR tech and to this work tech. And the lines are going to be very blurred. I just, there's a lot of individual pieces and components, but a lot of these things are just going to become part of a broader journey and less of a, having sort of this very functional set of capabilities with people only focused on this one thing.
I think that in the payroll, Terry, like you could see that probably most prevalent at HR tech with payroll and comp, Paul. So what used to be kind of arguably mortal enemies, right? We figure it out, you deliver it thing. They are now becoming very, very intertwined to the point where you're seeing some departments own both, like really own both. And I think that's because of some of the tech. And so I agree, Terry, like a lot of it's starting to get really blurred into more of a thing. And comp will have to, I think they'll have to adjust to that world for good and bad.
Yeah, I think,
and the access to the data is just so much different now, right?
Yeah, I think certainly you think about posting transparency or sort of pay transparency globally has put sort of talent acquisition and comp in frequent touch, right? And to, how do you surface more information and the right information in the offer process, which is like the greatest frontier of comp decisions, right? It's where we make the biggest impact. A 3% budget, you're not moving salaries that much. An offer, you're moving a lot of money around. And how do you do that well? So I think there's a couple of different examples where, the comp domain is starting to touch other things. Talk about skills. There's another buzzword we can use, but skills is an L&D domain historically. But then how do you reward for that, and how do you manage that? So I would agree with your broad statement that like these domain specific sort of separate use case driven technologies are starting to overlap and bump into each other in sometimes thoughtful ways, sometimes accidental ways. But it does create, hopefully, in the future, a more cohesive experience around, look, there's a recruit to offer process that the tech needs to work through that whole stack, and how do we do that
I think
well?
the access from the employee, Paul, to the data too. So payroll used to give the number out, right? And the employee knew that, but they didn't know where the number came from on the other side. And now they can share that number amongst their peers and how they got it. And like, I think just the fact that the data is so ubiquitous across all of their stuff, is going to force everyone to work together, whether they like it or not, to your point, like, because the employees now have access. And if you don't have the same information as the employees, they can talk freely about it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and none of this stuff can continue to take the amount of time that like everything is speeding up, right? And we don't need to hire somebody 45 days from now. We need to hire somebody 15 days from now. So the whole process gets condensed, and you just need things to happen faster. So that wheel is going to turn, and the HCM providers are putting a lot of technology in there from a comp perspective, from a different perspective, right? Maybe not the traditional perspective that you saw from a comp analyst perspective, right? Like to price a job, but that whole process is sort of evolving as well.
You mentioned your report, so let me segue and just pick up on, like, was there any other cool, like, or surprising findings that came from this iteration that you either were expecting and empathize your hypothesis of yours, or you were like, oh my gosh, I didn't see that coming?
There's always a lot of interesting things. I think one of the things I saw this year was there's obviously some budget pressures. Budgets have been in decline, and while organizations are still going to increase tech investments next year, that number has declined fairly substantially over the last 5 years by about 30%. The other thing that I talked about in the panel was that the number one thing across the board from a barrier to AI, when you look across all organizations of all sizes, it was cost. And I think so. There's still some confusion about like where they're paying for AI versus where it's just there, right? It's already there. But when you broke that down by size of organization and looked at what, for example, the board was saying versus executives versus people on the ground, the boards felt like their organizations did not have the skills. That was their number one barrier to implementing AI, was skill. And then at the executive level, it was knowledge and skills. So knowledge first, and then further down the line was sort of the skills. Like we don't have the knowledge to know what to do, much less the skills then to do it. So that was interesting. Maybe not surprising, but it was interesting, a pretty interesting data point. I still thought the data point that people didn't believe they were using embedded AI at this point was pretty substantial, given that they probably are and they just don't know. And then there were some interesting differences when you looked at like gender and age differences in terms of the way people responded. So, for example, when we asked them about if they're if they were adhering to ethical standards for the implementation of AI, 35% of men didn't know whether they were doing that or not. And females, it was 46%. So there's like a substantial difference in terms of like we just decided to look at some things based on gender and age, just see what came out. And so there were some just sort of oddities like that we thought were pretty interesting. Dived into it to figure out if there's any meaning there or not, but it was just interesting stuff.
Huh. I know, Teri, from a separate conversation with you and Stacy, we talked about the voice of comp in the survey. It's a broad HR tech survey, but absolutely, reward people who are listening and watching. You're welcome to participate as well. But you made the I think maybe you or Stacy made the comment that comp people provide very robust feedback in the survey.
They do.
So say more, I guess, about what what do you see from us, and what do you think drives comp people to give such robust feedback?
Yeah. Well, I think that, at least in my recollection of kind of being in that similar role, like we love this kind of stuff. We love data. We're the group within HR that likes math, because HR, they don't do math. And, they tend to be very vocal about their perspectives on what works and what doesn't. So when it comes to write-ins, so we get thousands of, the amount of people who write comments is amazing. Like that just kind of blows me away, because they sit and take a half an hour to 2 hours to take the survey, and then they write comments. So if you catch them at the right time, obviously they're going to tell you what they think. But what Stacy was referring to is on the comp side, we get tons of write-ins. And lots of people want to tell us what they don't like about it or what they do like. And what they think could be better or different. So I don't know what that is about comp, but they tend to be verbose, and they like to tell people what they're thinking about it.
Just for the record, legally, I'd like to note that stereotypes of our guests are not necessarily those reflected of the show.
I don't know. I'm on board with most of HR doesn't do math. I mean, Sean, you and I barely do math, it feels like half the time. But no, I think some of it, Terry, like I thought about it since that conversation with Stacy and you as well. And we're all very used to getting feedback, right? Like everybody has an opinion about comp. Everybody thinks they're an expert in comp. Yeah. So I think we're conditioned a little bit to, if the vehicle is there, use your voice. And, I mean, I've started some things in this space to help with this problem too, but I also think the comp world was just under-researched, and this is a place where they can express that perspective and, say, hey, we love this vendor, right? Like, shout out to salary.com, but you've been recognized as a voice of the customer leader because you've done good things. And there hasn't really been a place to say that. And I do think comp people believe in that, because we sit on the other side of that spectrum quite a bit. Like we get lots of feedback. So
I agree.
You don't have anyone. The other piece, I think, Paul, not having been a practitioner though, is they're generally on, alone on an island or very small group on an island,
for sure,
to share their thoughts with, good or bad or indifferent. And so I think the opportunity to constructively, and to constructively give input where people will listen. Because when you give input back on, hey, so and so's underpaid or overpaid, nobody listens. They walk into your office generally with an opinion already done, and so you just kind of take it. So I think I agree with you, Paul, that there's a willingness to give feedback where they can.
Yeah, and their responses tend to be very valid. You'll get those one-off responses in general from the survey that say, yeah, this sucks or whatever, but the comp people tend to be like very specific. They point to very specific issues. They point to very specific problems, and they can tell you exactly what it is. And so it might be fun, Paul, when we get the rest of the report done. So maybe November, December, when time frees up a little bit, to take a look at some of that, and like maybe we write an interesting article about that, because I do think it's interesting, and I think the data that we have around comp could be very informative to some of the stuff that you're doing from a broad picture perspective, and maybe we could write something interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And for those who aren't familiar, right? So the HR tech, report that Terry's referring to is a lot of, how do you feel as a customer, right? Trends, how are you confronting issues? What are you likely to do, right? So it's excellent sort of macro level, and the work that my team has done is super feature level, right? And some of it's just the comp person is such a nerd, and we know that we love those features and that detail. And we've talked about, like, how do you bridge that a little bit and sort of tie the story together from what's happening broadly? How are you experiencing tech? What does that mean to you? How do we tie that back to, how you use it? So I think there's there's a lot to explore about how the comp person can get out of Excel and actually use the right tech from multiple angles here. Yeah,
for sure.
As we get going towards the end, was there anything else that stood out at HR Tech or any topics that came up? Because there was, I'll give you, unless it's the same as yours. There was one I heard a couple of times with no good answer, so it'll be interesting. But is there anything that came up over and over from your perspective?
Think so. I'm like, I didn't get to a lot of the sessions. I had briefings all day with vendors and meetings with partners, and we did did our own podcast. So we were over in the booth with the Tin Cups and the Learys doing podcast stuff. So I don't, I think there was a different vibe and a different mood this year. And so while AI typically is the big topic, I didn't hear that word coming up every second. People were just much more focused on, like, where is this future of work going? And, how do we be a part of it? Like, how do we help move this forward? So that was kind of the sentiment I got.
Well, bourbon in your Coke Zero, it can be explained by all your time with Tin Cup.
Yeah.
now it's all coming together, and adding Ryan in the same place is not helpful.
Yeah.
I heard, be curious you guys take as kind of last topic, people curious about the cost issue. So as costs get driven up by energy costs, token costs, all this stuff. Like right now, it's I won't say free. Everyone knows they're paying for it, but you can do a lot with it because, but they're going to have to either pass that cost on, increase pricing. Like that piece is the other shoe to drop that I kept. No good answer. But basically that came up several times with people when you talk about cost to build things, cost to deliver, cost to multiple LLMs, cost of running multiple queries. To your point, like, do you not allow someone to say please and thank you in your version? Because actually the reason it costs, energy is that's going to have to get paid for by somebody, right?
Yeah.
On the energy front.
Yeah. Fewer words, right? I think that what people said in the research is, I think there was about 7% of people that said they'd pay extra. Like when you ask the question about, would you pay for AI capabilities in the solution? And again, it's already baked in. So it was kind of an interesting question, but the large percentage of people, so more than 90% said no, we don't want to pay extra for that. But we all know the prices are going to go up. I mean, that has to be reflected ultimately in that monthly fee, right? And as I said, people are planning on, not that many organizations are planning to increase their spending on HR tech investments, unless, of course, they have to because they're hiring more people.
This is where I think it gets really interesting, Teri, because at what point from a development standpoint, do you not incorporate AI into your workflow so that you can be a cost-effective provider because the costs are going to drive it up? So this is the piece I think over the next year, the discussions I had maybe with fellow development nerds and thinking about the cost model behind it is really interesting, because if it was free and it was just a matter of figuring out the skills and the knowledge that you mentioned earlier, then I think everyone would do it everywhere. But I think at some point it's going to be, to why we all don't have a supercomputer, at our desk, right? And so I think that's going to be the piece for me, looking at HR tech, the way everyone's trying to use it all is the cost structure changes at all to be more expensive, or somebody wants to take more margin in that space or whatever it is. Like, how is it going to happen? And then to your point, it's everywhere. So how do you unwind it? If it's part of your cost structure, does everything go up? And then what tech do you kick out if your budget doesn't move because your numbers are saying the numbers aren't going to move, right? Like, people aren't going to get more budget. So if everyone's stuff goes up, choices have to be made.
Yeah. And how do we start charging? Does this change I don't remember how long ago it's been now that we switched to this sort of per employee per month thing, right? So we started getting rent from everybody. But there could be another sea change there in terms of how we bill for some of these services and capabilities.
They are
right?
consumption, right? So, I mean, you think about
Yeah.
it, AI is a
You're seeing
consumption
credits
based
already.
tool.
Yeah.
And so that to me is the next really cool thing in AI. To your point, Paul, I think we're moving past the, is it a toy or is it a tool? Yeah, I think we're starting to see over this last year, you really saw more people putting it into the toolbox and it's there.
Yeah.
The question is, can they afford and what can they afford to have tools in their toolbox, right? And, like any contractor, you got specialty tools and other tools like, there's still a place for the handheld hammer or the handheld saw thing. So that to me was probably the other big takeaway, Terry, that I saw from people talking about like because some
Yeah.
your research at kind of the core of some of that saying there isn't going to be more money for tools. That's what's not happening right now.
Yeah, yeah, that would be a good conversation. I think we could get Stacy involved in that and see what she's seeing on that front. But I think there's the other topic of, what is this? So we're talking about this as a teammate, right? Our agentic teammates, but we all know the reality, right? So ultimately, we pay for this through not paying for other things.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it a shift from labor to tech or is it net new money, right? Those are really the only options.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's going to force, Paul, that decision, that piece inside. So how do you pay for the extended costs? Do you either have to drive top line? I mean, it's revenue or expense. One of those two's getting changed.
Yeah, at least for a while, right? Until the processor curves and or sort of energy policy can bring those costs back down, right? I mean, you said we don't have computers at our desk. Well, compared to 25 years ago,
We
do,
kind of do.
right? It just took a while for the cost of that to sort of catch up with sort of the investment cycle. And now it's like an assumption everybody gets a computer or two when they start a job, right? So there's these cycles between tech and labor sort of investments, I think. And it's just where will those curves overlap with economic conditions and availability to sort of make all this work?
Well,
or will the machines will the machines start coming for Terry in the interim?
in the meantime, I'll just go ask Gemini what the answer is to that. So Terry, the last question we always ask, or I always ask, is if you could, and you have a wide view of this, if you could automagically fix any one thing in HR, what would you fix?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I would move towards this. HR needs a rebranding at some level, and it's been called HR for a long time. We have moved the needle, at least in terms of how strategic this area or this function has been viewed, but I think that's going to evolve pretty quickly as the AI conversation evolves. And so I see HR playing a bit different role. Obviously, wanting to get the same results from a workforce and workforce production perspective. But I see that evolving because there's still a lot of people out there that just think HR is just they're all about compliance. That's what they do. And nobody likes the compliance. Nobody wants to deal with it. I had a very interesting conversation with my family chat before I went to HR Tech, and I said, "Oh, wish me luck. I'm getting ready to go speak to 1,000 people about AI." And this is my family, right? So my niece said, "Oh, what's your take on it? What's your stance on it?" That's what she said, which I got a big kick out of. So I came back with some answer. And then I got a totally different response from my brother, who's a little bit older than me, who retired the last couple of years. And I set off a firestorm for him because it wasn't so much about AI, it was about HR and his reaction as an employee to HR. And it was, it sort of gave me this feeling that there's a whole lot of people out there that they don't want to have any interaction with HR because if there's an interaction with HR, it's negative.
Correct. Well, the joke is, and you probably still have that too. It's maybe not as visceral, but if someone says, "Hey, Paul wants you down in HR," your first gut reaction is, "Oh crap," right? Maybe that's more me due to me, but in my interactions, but I think so. And I think back when you say that, I think that's a great answer because you think back when it was called personnel, right? And then they made the shift to human resources and kind of rebranded, and it was better. And now like, do they rebrand? I don't know what they rebrand as, not my department, but I agree with that. There is this kind of reaction like, oh crap, I did something wrong or I broke code or, I'm not compliant in some way. And so as opposed to, oh, cool, I'm going to go, get something cool.
Yeah, I'm going to go have a fun conversation about what I need to do to help this organization move forward. Yeah.
This has been great. Thanks so much for coming back on, and thanks for, jumping right on right after HR Tech so we can keep it fresh with everybody. And, we can make Paul feel bad that he didn't go.
FOMO.
Yeah.
FOMO.
I wondered if I could sound logical because I was kind of like, the first 2 days are okay. It's like day 3 when you kind of hit that wall and you're like, I need more sleep. Yeah. So, but thank you. I appreciate coming back on and seeing you guys and rapping with you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Teri.
All right. Bye, guys.